The wind cut sharply through the small Texas town as evening settled in, carrying with it the smell of gasoline and dust. Margaret Hill pulled her worn coat tighter around her thin frame while standing near the counter of a quiet roadside gas station. At 72, life had taught her how to survive on very little. That night, she opened her faded purse and counted her money slowly, $10. That was all she had left until the end of the week. It was meant for a simple dinner. A loaf of bread, maybe soup, something warm to help her sleep. As she turned toward the exit, her eyes caught sight of a young man outside, crouched beside a motorcycle. The bike looked powerful but lifeless, tilted slightly as if it had given up. The man removed his helmet, running a frustrated hand through his hair. His leather jacket was worn, his face tired, and his shoulders slumped with defeat. Margaret paused. She knew that look well, the look of someone stranded, unsure what to do next. The gas station clerk shook his head. "Bike's out of fuel," he muttered. "Guy doesn't have enough cash." Margaret hesitated. Her mind argued with her heart. "It's not your problem," she told herself. "You barely have enough for yourself." She had learned to be careful. Life had forced her to be. Widowed for over a decade, with no children and a small social security check, every dollar mattered. Yet something about the biker's quiet frustration reminded her of her late husband, Frank, who had once been stranded on a highway long ago when a stranger helped him without asking questions. Margaret took a slow breath, gripping her purse. She walked outside. "Excuse me," she said softly. The biker looked up, surprised. "Ma'am, you look like you could use a little help," she said with a gentle smile. Before he could respond, Margaret turned back toward the station, placed her $10 bill on the counter, and asked the clerk to put fuel into the motorcycle. She also bought a small coffee and handed it to the young man. His eyes widened. I can't take this. That's too much." Margaret shook her head. "You can. Everyone needs help sometimes." The biker stood up slowly, clearly moved. "My name's Jake," he said. "I promise I'll pay you back." Margaret chuckled lightly. "Just get home safe. That's payment enough." Jake filled the tank, started the engine, and the bike roared back to life. Before leaving, he removed his gloves and looked at her with sincere gratitude. "You didn't have to do this. I won't forget it." Margaret waved as he rode off into the dark. She walked back to her small apartment later that night, stomach empty but heart oddly warm. As she lay in bed, she never imagined that her simple kindness, given without expectation, had just reached someone connected to a brotherhood that valued loyalty above all else. What felt like a small sacrifice to her would soon return in a way she could never have dreamed. Morning sunlight filtered through the thin curtains of Margaret Hill's apartment, waking her earlier than usual. Her body ached slightly as she sat up, the quiet of the neighborhood broken only by distant traffic. The previous night's events drifted through her mind. The stranded biker, the $10, the coffee. She sighed softly, wondering how she would stretch the rest of the week with an empty pantry. Still, there was no regret in her heart. Helping him had felt right. Margaret shuffled into the kitchen and poured herself a glass of water when a low, unfamiliar rumble echoed outside. At first, she thought it was thunder. Then the sound grew louder, deeper, multiplied, rolling through the street like a wave. She froze, heart racing, and slowly moved toward the window. What she saw made her grip the curtain in disbelief. Motorcycles, dozens of them, were lining the street in front of her old apartment building. Chrome glinted in the morning sun. Black leather jackets, American flags, and carefully parked bikes filled the road. Neighbors stepped outside, whispering, some recording on their phones. Margaret felt a mix of fear and confusion. Did I do something wrong? She wondered nervously. A knock sounded at her door, gentle, respectful. She opened it slowly. Standing in front was the same young biker from the night before. Jake removed his helmet and smiled warmly. Behind him stood nearly 50 riders, silent and serious, yet calm. "Ma'am," Jake said, lowering his head slightly, "we've been looking forward to seeing you again." Margaret swallowed. Is something the matter?" Jake shook his head. "No, ma'am. We're here to say thank you." He stepped aside, revealing an older man with a gray beard and kind eyes. "This is Mark," Jake explained. "He leads our riding family." Mark took a step forward. "What you did last night may seem small to you," he said, his voice steady, "but to us, it meant everything." Jake is like a son to many of us. You helped him without knowing who he was, and without asking for anything in return." Jake continued, emotion clear in his voice. "When I got back, I told them about you. About how you gave your last money to a stranger. That kind of heart deserves more than words." One of the riders carried forward several grocery bags and set them gently on the table. Another handed Mark a thick envelope. With care, Mark placed it in Margaret's hands. Inside were documents, a bank check, and a letter. Mark smiled. "Your apartment is paid for, and so are your bills for the year. There's also enough here to make sure you never have to choose between kindness and dinner again." Margaret's hands trembled as tears filled her eyes. She tried to speak but couldn't. Jake gently squeezed her hand. "You reminded us what real strength looks like." Outside, the riders started their engines, not loudly, but proudly. As they rode away, Margaret stood in her doorway, overwhelmed with gratitude. Her $10 had come back as dignity, security, and proof that compassion, when given freely, can return multiplied beyond imagination. The weeks that followed Margaret Hill's unexpected windfall felt surreal. Her small apartment, once quiet and sparse, now carried a sense of safety and warmth she hadn't felt in years. She unpacked groceries, organized her new belongings, and carefully pinned the letter from the bikers on her kitchen wall. Every time she glanced at it, her heart swelled with gratitude. The words weren't just formal thanks. They spoke of respect, loyalty, and a recognition of human kindness. Margaret realized her simple act of giving had created ripples far beyond what she could imagine. Word spread through the neighborhood about the biker's surprising visit. Her neighbors, once accustomed to seeing her struggle quietly, now viewed her with admiration. Children waved whenever she stepped outside, and some adults stopped by to chat about the unusual and heartwarming incident. Margaret, who had always been modest, smiled politely but felt slightly embarrassed by the attention. She hadn't helped Jake for recognition, she had acted purely out of compassion. Yet, seeing the smiles and hearing the words of respect reminded her that kindness often inspires more than one expects. Jake returned to town a few days later. He parked his motorcycle carefully outside Margaret's building and knocked on her door. "Morning, Margaret," he said, removing his helmet with a grin. "Thought I'd check in." Margaret laughed softly. "You've already done more than enough. How can I thank you for all of this?" Jake shook his head. "No thanks needed. Just promise me you'll keep doing what you do, helping people without asking anything in return. That's rare these days." They sat together with cups of tea, talking about their lives. Margaret shared stories of her late husband, her struggles, and the little joys she found each day. Jake spoke of his biking family, their travels, and the unspoken code they followed: loyalty, honesty, and helping those in need. Margaret felt a connection beyond age, background, and circumstance. She realized that small gestures could bridge worlds. In the following months, Margaret found herself thriving in ways she hadn't imagined. The check she had received allowed her to catch up on bills, purchase necessities without worry, and even donate to local charities. She became an informal mentor in the neighborhood, offering guidance and occasional help to anyone struggling. People often asked how her life had changed so quickly, and she would simply smile. "A little kindness goes a long way," she would say, and people would nod, taking the words to heart. One quiet evening, Margaret looked out at the street below, remembering the day she had given Jake her last $10. She realized that generosity, no matter how small, could transform lives, sometimes in ways one could never predict. That night, she whispered a silent thank you to the universe, grateful that her act of compassion had not only helped a stranger but had returned as a life-changing gift. The memory of the 50 bikers, their engines roaring in respect, remained vivid, reminding her that goodness is always noticed, often when least expected. Margaret finally understood that her life, once marked by quiet struggle, had become a story of hope, kindness, and the extraordinary power of human connection. And it all began with $10, a coffee, and a simple act of courage.